morning, everybody, and welcome to our Act of Remembrance this morning. And before we actually have our Act of Remembrance, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about why we do it and what it's all about, really. The memory is a strange thing, I find. I'm going to use this trunk here. Now, this is a trunk that my father brought home in 1961 and plopped it in the hall of our house, much to my mum's annoyance, frankly. It is huge, and he brought it all the way over from Singapore. He thought it was the best thing in the world. I won't tell you what she thought of it, but it's been in our house ever since. And about 6 months ago, it ended up in my house because Mum went to a smaller place and she dropped off this trunk at our house. And I have to tell you, my wife had a very similar response to my mother when it arrived. But it was really interesting because in it, she had stacked all the little bits and pieces that I'd left at home when I left, however many years ago that might be, probably 40 years ago now, 45 years ago that I left home. And there were a couple of things happened. First of all, I opened it. And when you open it, you get an unbelievable smell from the wood that it's made of. It's made from a wood called camphor, which has a really strong smell. And you know, the second I opened it, I remembered an incident from when I was 3 years old. Very, very, very tiny. And I have an older brother, and I was a bit of a pain to my older brother. And I went up to his bedroom and I was playing with his music. And I was listening to a song that I really liked at the time, still quite good I think, that he would have been really cross if he'd known that I was playing with his brand new record at the time. Not only that, but the group that were playing, my dad thought were next to the end of the world, frankly. If I were to be listening to that music, my brain would be warped for the rest of my life, in his view. They were a dreadful influence on all young people. But funny enough, when I opened that box, not only did I remember this incident, but I remembered the music and all sorts of things came flooding back. And the reason it sticks in my mind, I guess, is because when I was playing with my brother's music, he came home, which for a 3-year-old was a disaster. I was going to be in big trouble. So I climbed in the box to hide. Now, that's all well and good, but you'll notice that it's got a little brass locky thing on it. So there I was, age 3, climbed in the box, and I can now, I'd never thought of this incident until this box arrived, but I can now remember lying in that box, locked in, and listening to this dreadful, dreadful, mind-changing music. So that's a band which was going to influence youth to revolution. Anyone know the band? Anyone know that band? Go on, back. It is the Beatles, yeah, dreadful bunch of boys. Okay, in my dad's view, they were the end of the world for young people. It's a different era, I suppose, but I can suddenly remember that. Here's another thing that came out of the box. Honestly, you might wonder why, but I can't remember. I haven't thought about this hat for 35 years. Do you want me to wear it? I thought you would. That fantastic piece of thank you, I look lovely. Now, this was made by a little tiny girl who, again, I haven't thought about for years and years and years. Her name was Julie. Took me a while to remember her name. She was the brother of someone I used to go sailing with, and we were going off to a big world championship, and she very kindly made these, one for each of us, so that we could wear them at the world championships for good luck. Can you imagine turning up looking like that? I think we did actually, but there we go. I haven't thought about that hat. Do you know, I haven't really thought about that race, that world championship, for years. And suddenly I can remember that we were sailing a boat and its sail number was 36006. I can remember it had a nick out of the side of it where I'd fallen off one day and damaged it. Stuff I hadn't thought about for years and years and years. Because something had triggered my memory. And that is the beauty of these little things, these little lumps of plastic. They're strange little things, pretty meaningless in themselves. But what they do is really, really special. Because they make us, they prompt all those sort of memories like I've just got from my silly hat. They prompt us to think about something. They prompt us to try and remember what has gone on in the history. And I struggle a little bit with remembering what went on in the World Wars because I wasn't there. How can I remember it? Perhaps it makes me think about them rather than remembering. I'll tell you what happens when I see these every year. In my last school, we had this wonderful little book, and in it are pictures. And each picture is of someone from the school who died in the war. Some of them are children, some of them are staff, some of them are support staff. The school lost quite a lot of people. And the headmaster at the time made a little note of them, made sure he had a picture, and he remembers them in this wonderful book. So when Remembrance comes around, it's strange. I think about these people, not those, these guys. Now, I was very lucky. My first school had a steam railway, which these guys built back in the 1930s, when they were 10, 11, 12, 13. If any of you there are interested in health and safety, just look at the fact that they're not wearing boiler suits or heat-proof jackets or gloves. They're just shoveling the coal in and putting their legs around a hot boiler. It's great, different time. And three of those boys in there, I feel I know quite well. Here they go. James Yates, Michael Dunheath, and David Yates. Now those three were, as you can see, just ordinary prep school boys. Michael, there in the white, won more rugby matches on his own than anyone else. He's a monster. He's only 12. He's huge. Okay, the Evans boys were very, very good sportsmen. The little one down here, David, he went to the science labs in the days where you were allowed to go to the science labs and have a go. And he had a pretty major accident. I won't tell you exactly what went on, but the science labs were closed for some years after his little accident in the science labs. He was a real character. Now, if we go back to that original picture, there's Michael as a young man, there's James, and there's David as they left their schools and their universities. But let's go back to their prep school times. Because if you read the little bit at the bottom, I think the last few words down here are quite telling. Okay, many of the boys seen here did not survive the war. And that for schools at that time was just a way of life. You did your time at school, you went off to war, and lots of you didn't come back. And strangely, they're the people I remember when I see the little poppies. And something else that I'd like to sort of mention really is that it's not just these guys, the ones who were killed. I don't think I like to remember, but I do remember the people who surround them. So look at this little incident here. Here we have a graveyard that I came across in Herefordshire. Nothing very unusual about it. You'll notice here that there's a big grave with 2 oak trees in it. And that is the grave of a chap called Jim Simpson, who was killed in the First World War, aged 19, I think. Yes, 19, in 1918. Now, if you look carefully, behind that, there's a little square set of railings. And that is the grave of Susan Simpson, who died in 1998. That's 70 years after he died. So she was sort of left behind. And if you could read the plaque, and I'm sorry we can't make it big enough, it's a lovely plaque to read, but the 2 trees she planted in 1920 to represent their marriage. So again, you could probably go around churchyards all over the place, but this is the one I saw. These are the 2 people I remember. And if we're thinking about those who died, we think about those who surround them, that were left behind. Because I think the bottom of the plaque, in fact, it's this little plaque over here, where her grave is. This is all about Jim's service. He was actually quite a brave chap. But the little one at the bottom says just a little bit about Susan. And the last 2 lines of it really struck me. I'll let you read them. So, the soldiers are killed, but this is the effect it has on those around them. And the poppy is a symbol to think about all of the people involved with war, not just those who died. If we had longer, and perhaps if I was doing this next year, I'd be giving you some examples of what the war graves look like around the world. And we always focus on the beautiful white war graves. You've probably seen pictures of them. Fields and fields of little white stones, each with a soldier's name on. They are absolutely beautiful. But if you go to other parts of Europe, you will find that there are cemeteries for the German soldiers. And interestingly, they're very dark, they're very dingy, they're very depressing places. Because at that time, we didn't see those who were killed as people, we saw them as enemy. But actually, I think it's very important to be thinking about all of the people who were killed, and like Susan here, all of the ones who were affected by war. We'll have this little wreath out by our memorial, and our memorial isn't quite for the same thing, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be remembering those people from Kingsley who've died in more recent times. And the poppies, I hope, will just jog your memory to give them a thought. And that's what it's all about. Let's move on. So this minute's silence that we're going to have, it's a minute where you can reflect on war. You can reflect on the effects of war. And you can perhaps make that something in your life that you don't want to be getting involved with. Now, there are some certain ceremonies around what we're about to do. And we're going to, we do this at 11 o'clock, because on the 11th hour of the 11th day, the 11th month, the guns stopped firing in France for the First World War. And I find this fascinating, because someone was there with a stopwatch, and at 11 o'clock they said stop firing. Interestingly, at 5 seconds to 11, it was still acceptable to be firing and shooting and killing people, but 11 o'clock it had to stop. And there's a recording here taken from one of the battlefields of the First World War, and you will see why, I hope, at 11 o'clock on the 11th month, the 11th day, is such an important time. And you'll hear it. I'm not going to explain it. You're all intelligent. You'll just, I hope, get why we do it at this time, when you hear the guns stop. What happens then is there'll be a bugle call, and at that point, it would be really lovely if you all stood up. And then there will be a very famous piece of verse that's said almost always before we have these little minutes of silence. And then we will just stand in silence to remember those affected by war. Interestingly, on the screen, you will see lots of poppies falling out of the sky at the Royal Albert Hall. This is the formal sort of national remembrance service, and each poppy represents one person who was killed either in the First or Second World War. And if you're standing there not liking the 1 minute or whatever, you can't think of what to think about, just look at the number of poppies that are falling out of the sky. So, we'll move on And we will now have our act of remembrance. Remember, it's when the bugle's sounding that I'd like you to stand up.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Thank you guys, Privis will let you go now.